We made a mistake. Not a small one. Not a diplomatic miscalculation or a border violation that could be smoothed over with trade concessions and a formal apology. No. We took their children. I want to be precise about that because precision is the only thing keeping me sane right now. We didn't take prisoners of war. We didn't detain combatants. We didn't intercept a military convoy. We boarded what our intelligence classified as an unregistered civilian transport operating without proper lane certification in contested space, and we discovered 17 human juveniles in the cargo hold, unescorted, barely restrained, eating ration packs and playing some kind of game involving a small rubber ball. They looked at us like we were mildly interesting, not frightened, plus not screaming. One of them, the smallest one, and barely reaching my secondary knee joint, pointed at my rank insignia and asked what it meant, in our language, with the correct inflection, which General Voskaren, Supreme Commander of the 5th Reclamation Fleet, conqueror of the Dravari Reach, has been in command for 47 years. He started shaking 11 minutes after we brought the children aboard. He hasn't basically stopped. I've been keeping a log. Timestamp precision to the 3rd decimal. And it's a habit, one my colleagues find irritating. But right now, with everything unraveling at exactly the pace I feared it would, I'm very glad I've a record. Because when this is over, if this is over, someone is going to ask me what happened. And I'm going to need proof that it happened this fast. 3 days. That's all it took. 17 human children. 1 alien general. And the moment we realized, too late, that we hadn't taken hostages, we'd handed them a beachhead. The children were singing when we breached the hold. I guess not in distress, not as a basically coping mechanism. I considered that hypothesis and discarded it within approximately 4 seconds because the song had a recurring comedic structure. There was a punchline. I could tell because 3 of the older ones kept laughing at the same point in the refrain, and the younger ones kept demanding it be repeated. Boarding Sergeant Thiel Rin, a 12-year veteran of contested space operations, stood in the breach and didn't move for a full 6 count. "Sub-Commander," he said eventually without turning around. "The hold is occupied." "I can see that." "Sergeant." "By juveniles?" "Also visible." "Human juveniles?" I'd been standing behind him. I stepped around him to look properly because I needed to see it with my own primary senses, not filtered through his obvious distress. 17 of them, and the youngest was perhaps 4 of their years. I'd learn later it was 6, which recalibrated several of my assumptions about their growth rates. The oldest was, at a rough estimate, 14. They were seated in loose clusters on the cargo floor, surrounded by blanket rolls, personal effects in various states of organization, and enough food packaging to suggest they had been here for at minimum 2 or 3 days. A portable water reclamation unit hummed in the corner, clearly assembled from components that didn't originally belong together. The rubber ball was already in motion, which I watched it arc across the hold, bounce off a support strut, and land precisely in the hands of a girl who hadn't looked up from the device she was reading. She caught it without looking. "Nice catch, Priya," said the boy who'd thrown it. "Wasn't looking," she said. Still reading, and the boy, 11, maybe 12, with a collection of small adhesive symbols on the back of one hand, turned to look at us. Specifically at me. My bioscan overlay was trying to categorize his facial expression and returning inconclusive results. It kept oscillating between curiosity and assessment. "Are you the ones who bumped us?" he asked. I didn't, know what bumped meant in context. I said nothing. "The ship shook," he clarified, with the patient tone of someone accustomed to explaining things to people who are slower than him. "Then the lights went yellow. We figured someone docked on us." "We boarded your vessel," I said. This transport was operating without authorization in restricted space. He nodded, not alarmed, not even particularly interested. "Okay, is Mira all right? She's flying. Our pilot." "Your pilot is being detained." He processed this. Then he turned to the others and said something in a secondary language. Faster, clipped, clearly not meant for me, and the dynamic in the hold shifted just slightly. Not fear. Something more like attention. The small ones stopped singing. The older ones sat up straighter. The girl who'd caught the ball closed her device. I noted this. Timestamp 7:16:04. General Voskaren reviewed the situation from his command deck. I gave him the full report in exactly 4 minutes, which is the window he allows for any briefing before he begins interrupting. He let me finish, which meant the content was unusual enough to override his habits. 17, he said. Correct, sir. Juveniles. The oldest is approximately 14 of their years. The youngest, we now believe, is 6. He looked at the feed from the hold. For what it's worth, children had reorganized themselves. The older ones forming a loose perimeter around the younger ones, which was interesting because there was no threat visible and no reason for the configuration except apparent instinct. They were also, in the intervening 20 minutes, fully engaged in some kind of structured activity involving stacked blocks and what appeared to be a scoring system. "Why are they playing a game?" the general said, and it wasn't really a question. "Unknown, sir." "We've detained them." "Technically, they're in the hold they were already in. We've detained their pilot." He turned to look at me. Voskaren, for what it's worth, has a particular expression for moments when he suspects the universe is generating problems, in particular for him. He was wearing it now. "Pull up the pilot's manifest. What was this vessel doing?" The manifest was, to use a technical term, chaotic. The transport was registered to a human commercial cooperative operating in the outer transit corridors. The cargo listing included food supplies, educational materials, and listed under a miscellaneous category with casual disregard for any regulatory framework, minors in transit, unaccompanied, authorized by Parental Covenant 7 series. Parental Covenant, the general repeated. It appears to be a human legal instrument. Essentially, the parents signed documentation authorizing the transport to carry their children to a destination. What destination? I checked. A colony installation, which approximately 9 transit days from current position. And the parents are at the origin point. Yes, sir. Approximately 6 transit days in the other direction. Voskaren was quiet for a moment. I watched his, secondary gill plates flex, a low-level stress indicator he'd never fully managed to suppress. "They TBH sent their children across contested space," he said. "Alone? With a pilot. A pilot we've now detained." "Yes, sir." He looked at the feed again. In the hold, one of the older children, the boy who'd spoken to me first, was now sitting with one of the smaller ones who appeared to have scraped a knee at some point and wasn't particularly upset about it, but was receiving thorough and competent first aid regardless. The boy was narrating what he was doing as he did it. I guess teaching, possibly. "Get me legal counsel," the general said, "and someone from Xeno Diplomatic, and..." He stopped, and, "What are we feeding them?" I checked with the boarding team. "Standard ration packs, sir, issued approximately 40 minutes ago." "And?" "They ate them." A pause. "They ate standard ration packs." "All of them, sir." Some requested additional portions. Standard ration packs aren't well liked even by the species they're designed for. They are caloric, nutritionally sufficient, and aggressively flavorless. Our xenodiet specialists have a running list of species who've refused them. It is a long list. The general looked at me with an expression I'd classify as early-stage philosophical unease. "Which child is in charge?" I stopped, thought about it, reviewed the, feed from the last 40 minutes. "The boy, approximately 12 years. He pretty much appears to be..." I searched for the right framework. "He appears to be managing the others." "How old is he?" 12, approximately." Voskaren's gill plates flexed again, which I want to speak with him. Here's the thing. His name was Dio. He gave it without hesitation, along with the names of all the others, in order of age, oldest to youngest, and also which ones had specific dietary needs. Which ones were prone to motion disturbance, and which ones would need additional reassurance if things get tense. He said this last part while looking at the general with what I can only describe as measured calm. The same way an experienced logistician looks at a supply problem. Not frightened of it, accounting for it. "Things aren't going to get tense," the general said. "Okay," said Dio. He didn't look like he necessarily believed this, but he also didn't look like it mattered especially. He was more focused on the general's rank insignia. "Are you the person in charge of this ship?" "I'm the commander of this fleet." Dio took this in. "Okay, so you decide what happens to us?" "That's correct. And to Mira. Your pilot is being processed according to..." "She's not dangerous," Dio said. "You know, not defensive, informational. She was just transiting. She's done this route 4 times. Ask her. She'll tell you." I made a note. Timestamp 8/31/17. "The child is attempting to manage the negotiation. We're aware of the circumstances," the general said. "Okay." Dio nodded. "So when can we talk to our parents?" The general looked at me. I looked at, honestly, my tablet, and standard communications blackout protocol during detainment operations was 12 cycles. Telling A, in my opinion, 12-year-old human that we'd be blocking contact with his parents for 12 cycles seemed like a category of decision I wasn't equipped to evaluate. "We'll look into communications access," the general said. "They're going to worry," Dio said. Still calm, and still that flat, logistical tone. Like, "My mom specifically. She worries. If there's a way to just send a message, even a short one, that would help." Vos Karen, destroyer of 3 enemy fleets, nodded. "Will I think, see what we can do," he said. I noted, this, which timestamp 08/32/55. The general has agreed to consider modifying communications blackout protocol in response to a request from a 12-year-old child. I, didn't annotate this in the official log. I annotated it here instead. The problem wasn't the children. I want to be precise about that. The children were, and I mean this with full technical accuracy, fine, better than fine. By the end of the first day, they had catalogued their section of the hold, identified 3 minor environmental concerns: inadequate air circulation in the northwest quadrant, loose coupling on the water reclaimer, suboptimal lighting frequency, and submitted a written list to the boarding team. Written, on paper, and which they'd found in their own supplies. Sergeant, in my opinion, Thiel Rin brought me the list personally, which he had the expression of a man whose training had thoroughly failed to prepare him for this moment. "They found a grease pen," he said, handing me the paper. "Did they have permission to..." They asked. I didn't understand the question fast enough, and by the time I'd processed it, they'd already written the list. I read it. The handwriting was multiple. Several children had contributed. The environmental concerns were accurate. I'd already flagged the air circulation issue internally, but they'd gotten to it first. Point 4 on the list read, "Also, Seo Yon wants to know if there's a window somewhere. Not urgent, just she likes stars." And point 5. "Dio says point 4 isn't an official request, just a personal preference. Please disregard." Point 6. "It's fine, Dio." I put it on the list. I showed it to the general. He read it twice. His gill plates did the thing again. "Find them a window," he said. "Sir, regulation. Find them a viewport they can see that's adjacent to any tactical systems and let them look at stars." He handed me back the list. "And fix the air circulation." The parents found out at the 14-hour mark. Not from us, from each other. Through some kind of informal communication network that our intelligence division still does not fully understand. A distributed social system that apparently operates on the principle that if 17 families simultaneously discover their children are late to a destination, the resulting information cascade will reach every connected node within approximately 3 hours, regardless of official communications blackouts. By the time I was informed, we had received 42 formal inquiries through diplomatic channels, 2 through military liaison, and 1 directly addressed to the General by personal name from a woman who, based on the tone of her message, was probably Dio's mother. The General read it once. She included a photograph, he said. Sir? Of her son, which, as an infant. He turned the communication toward me. It was, indeed, a photograph. Dio, approximately 1 year old, sitting on a surface with an expression of deep concentration, aimed at a small toy. She included it for what it's worth, with the diplomatic inquiry. I'd no framework for this. I made a note. Timestamp 21/0744. Human parent has to be fair. Submitted photographic evidence of child's infancy as component of formal diplomatic communication. Purpose: unknown. Which effect? Observable. The General put the communication down. He was quiet for a moment. Where are we on the route deviation analysis? He said eventually. We're looking at 3 additional transit days minimum before we can pass them through to their destination. What about returning them to the origin point? 6 days, sir. And their pilot's transport would need to be... What's the fastest resolution? I pulled up the calculations. Forwarding them to the destination with an escort vessel is actually the fastest. 2.4 days. Do that. Sir, the legal clearance for... I'll sign the clearance, draft it TBH, and bring it to me. He stood up from his command chair. I'd served under Vos Karen for 11 years. I'd never seen him stand up from his chair in the middle of a briefing. Is the boy... Dio, is he sleeping? I checked the feed. 2109 ship standard. Most of the kind of children were in sleeping configurations. Dio wasn't. So he was seated near the makeshift window we'd arranged, a maintenance viewport in a secondary corridor that security had reluctantly unlocked for limited supervised access, with 2 of the younger children asleep against him, 1 on each side. He was awake, looking at the stars. No, sir, I said. The General looked at the feed for a moment. Then he looked away. Make sure they have breakfast before any official processing begins tomorrow. Real food, not rations. Pull from the officers' mess if necessary. Sir. And he stopped, started again, and send that woman a response. Dio's mother. Personal response, to be fair, my name on it. Tell her her son has been managing exceptionally and will reach his destination safely. Sir, a personal communication from a fleet general to a... Von. Yes, to sir. Draft the response. I drafted it. Timestamp 21/14/30. I've been in military intelligence for 19 years. I've assessed, threats from 7 different species across 4 contested systems. I've a rating of distinguished analysis on the collective threat index. I've been 3 times in situations that could be classified as having no good outcome. I didn't put 17 human children on an unregistered transport on any threat matrix. Not once, which I'm revising my assessment frameworks. Not because the children were dangerous. They weren't, and they were, and I want to be precise, the least dangerous beings currently aboard this vessel, and I include the General's decorative aquatic organisms in that comparison. What they were was something I don't have a category for. By the time I filed my end-of-day log, 3 crew members had been drawn into a card game. The Hold's air circulation issue had been fixed by 2 of our maintenance engineers who'd gotten into what I can only describe as a collaborative problem-solving discussion with the oldest 3 children, and Sergeant Thale Ryn had learned the name of the rubber ball. Its name was apparently Gerald. He didn't ask why. He told me later he thought it was better not to know. I agreed with him. I didn't, however, include this assessment in the official log. Here, though, timestamp 23/58/01, end of day 1, I won't it plainly. We came aboard sort of their ship armed and armoured and operating under doctrine. We, detained them, interrupted their journey, fed them rations, and put them in a hold. By day's end, or the hold was better organised than it had been when they arrived, 3 of my crew were voluntarily spending time with them and my commanding general had personally committed to writing a note to one of their mothers. I kept trying to identify the moment when control of the situation transferred. I couldn't find it. That, I think, is the point, which the crisis began, as crises on this vessel tend to, at a completely inconvenient hour. Specifically, 5:47, ship standard, when one of the youngest children, a girl named Amara, age 7, who had up to this point been notable primarily for her extensive collection of small, smooth stones and her habit of counting them in audible whispers, developed what our medical officer initially classified as a routine thermal response, meaning a fever. This isn't, I should clarify, an unusual thing. Children get fevers. It is a thing that happens. Our medical systems can handle a fever from approximately 31 known biological species with no complications. The complication wasn't the fever. The complication was Dio. He had apparently been awake since before the fever spiked, he explained when I arrived. That, to be fair, he hadn't, as Amara was running hot around 4 o'clock and had been monitoring her. He had also, in the intervening 90 minutes, identified the medical kit in his group's supplies, administered 2 items from it, and composed a detailed written summary of Amara's symptoms, her thermal progression as he'd tracked it, her last meal, and any relevant history he was aware of. He handed this to our medical officer, Lieutenant Sane, before Sane had fully processed the situation. Sane read it. Then she, looked at Dio. Then she looked at me. He has better intake documentation than half my residents, she said. He's 12, in my opinion, I said, and I noticed. Dio, for his part, was kneeling next to Amara's sleeping mat and holding her hand, not in a sort of way that suggested panic. Plus, in a way that suggested, I reviewed this for several minutes later trying to find a better word and couldn't, steadiness. Pure, deliberate steadiness. Like something he'd decided to do and was committed to regardless of the outcome. Is she going to be okay? He asked. Sane scanned, ran the analysis, looked at the results. It's a standard immune response. Manageable. She'll be fine. Dio nodded. He didn't look relieved, so much as confirmed. As if he'd already decided she'd be fine and the medical assessment was simply agreeing with him. What did you give her? Sane asked, reviewing hisnts. He listed 2 items from the kit. Correct items, correct dosage, correctly spaced. Sane had no adjustment to make. She sort of filed her report later with a note that read, child, human, male, approximately 12, administered pre-treatment consistent, with standard pediatric fever protocol. No error, no correction required. I've attached this to my own log. Timestamp 6:04:22. For completeness, by 8 a.m., Amara's fever had broken, she was eating, and she had resumed counting her stones. Several other children were watching this with the tolerant patience of people who had seen the stone counting many times before. The general received a second message from the diplomatic network. This one wasn't from Dio's mother, which it was from a body identifying itself as the Terran Civilian Transit Authority, and it included, in the very first line, the full legal text of something called the Unaccompanied Minor Transit Compact, a document which was apparently an interspecies agreement we had signed approximately 6 years ago without anyone in our fleet command ever reading it closely. I read it closely, which the compact specified that unaccompanied human minors in transit are classified as protected non-combatant civilians regardless of the registered status of their transport. Boarding, detaining, or materially disrupting their journey, including, and I'm quoting directly here, "To delay in excess of operational minimum for safety verification constitutes a Class 2 transit violation under the Joint Corridor Accords. We were, as of this message, in violation." The message didn't say this aggressively, and it said it the way that very confident legal teams say things when they know they're correct and are simply waiting for you to reach the same conclusion. It also included, as an attachment, a full summary of the 17 children's names, ages, and travel authorizations, and a politely worded request that we calculate the earliest possible time we could help with their continued journey. There was a secondary attachment. I almost missed it. It was a news article, published approximately 2 hours ago on a human information network. The headline was, 17 children missing after civilian transport intercepted in Kiev corridor. Families await word. The article, honestly, was accompanied by photographs. I sat with this for a moment. Then I brought it to the general. He read it. For what it's worth, the gill plate thing. Worse than yesterday. How many families have access to this information network? He asked. Based on subscriber data. Approximately 400 million. Silence. Sir, I said carefully, the children are fine. This is a documentation and public information problem, not get me legal, get me, I think, diplomatic, and find out if there's any way to transmit a statement to that network, because the last thing I need is 400 million. He stopped. Restarted. What are the children doing right now? I checked the feed. Years 8-17 ship standard. The children were eating breakfast from the officer's mess, as ordered. 2 of the younger ones were laughing at something. 3 of the older ones were grouped around a flat surface doing something that, on review, appeared to be a collaborative drawing project. Eating and drawing, I said. The general looked at the feed. Long enough that I made a note of it. Timestamp 8/17/44. Make sure they have art. Supplies, he said. Whatever they need. Sir, we're not exactly... Von? Yes, sir. I sourced art supplies from the recreational stores. We had them because someone in fleet requisitions had, at some point, decided that crew morale required access to creative materials. I'd never thought about this decision before. When I was thinking about it now with a kind of retrospective gratitude I couldn't fully articulate. I spent the late morning reviewing the diplomatic response framework with our legal team and trying not to watch the hold feed every 20 minutes. I watched it every 15 instead, which at 9:40, Dio found me in the secondary corridor, the one with the viewport, where I'd gone to think and accidentally stayed to look at stars, which I almost never do because it is generally unproductive. He didn't announce himself. He simply came and stood next to me and looked at the stars too, for approximately 30 seconds before saying, "Is the legal stuff complicated?" "Yes," I said. "Because of TBH, the compact thing?" I looked at him. "How do you know about the compact?" He shrugged. "Mira told me about it before we left. She does a lot of these runs. Said if we ever got stopped, that's the thing that fixes it." He paused. "She's still detained?" "Yes." "Is she in trouble?" "That's being assessed." He nodded, looked back at the stars. "Plus, she's not a bad person. She's a little chaotic, but she's not bad." He said, this like a formal character reference, like it needed to be on record. "She taught me the fever protocol. Last TBH, run we did, one of the little ones got sick and she walked me through it." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "You've kind of done this route before?" "Twice, and this is my 3rd time." He looked at me sideways. "Some of the others, it's their first. I try to make it less scary. By managing things. Someone has to." He said it without any apparent awareness that this was extraordinary. No sense that a 12-year-old voluntarily assuming structural responsibility for 16 other children on a multi-day unsupervised transit through contested space was anything other than a logistical given. I made a note. Timestamp 9:44:11. The child treats collective responsibility as a self-evident response to circumstances. Not a sacrifice. Kind of, plus not heroism. A baseline. "Your mom sent a message," I told him. The general responded. He looked at me. For the first time, his expression changed in a way that broke the logistical surface, something underneath it. "Did he?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "That you've been managing exceptionally and will reach your destination safely." Dio looked back at the stars. TBH, his jaw moved slightly. He said nothing for a long moment. "That's good," he said eventually. "She worries. You mentioned that. She's going to send something embarrassing. She always does when she's relieved." He said this like a warning. Probably another photo. The general received the first one? The baby photo? Yes. A short pause. Okay, that's sort of mortifying, he said, and he sounded for one moment completely 12 years old. Not a logistics coordinator, not a caretaker, a kid who was embarrassed by his mother. You can tell him he doesn't have to keep that. I'll pass along the note. He looked at me. Then, briefly, he smiled. It was a different kind of smile from the ones I'd been observing. Not the social management smile, not the reassurance smile he deployed on the younger ones. Smaller, more private. He went back inside before I could catalogue it properly. The pivot happened at 1300. I want to be precise about what kind of pivot, because pivot is doing significant work in that sentence. Nothing exploded. No one was hurt. What pretty much happened was a conversation, and conversations are theoretically among the least dangerous things that can occur on a military vessel. This one restructured my understanding of the situation from the ground up, and I want to document it carefully. The general had decided, for reasons he described as due diligence, and which I suspected were actually more complicated, to speak formally with Dio again. To be fair, not an interrogation, not a debrief. Something he called a situation clarification, and which looked, from the outside, like a 12-year-old and a fleet general sitting across from each other at a table with 2 cups of water and very different amounts of military experience. Voskaren asked about the route. Dio answered. Voskaren asked about the frequency of these transits. Dio answered. Voskaren asked, and I watched him decide to ask this, watched him turn it over once. Do your parents worry when you make these runs? Dio was quiet for a moment. My mom does. Plus, my dad says he doesn't, but then he doesn't sleep well. He said this with the easy accuracy of someone who has observed it carefully. But they let me do it because the colony needs kids to come in. Families are still getting set up. You can't just leave them there without enough children. He said this as if it were obvious, as if the idea of not going was the strange position. The general looked at him. You go because the colony needs children. There aren't enough families settled yet. The kids who go help the younger ones adjust. It's sort of easier if some of us are already comfortable with the transit. And you volunteered. The first time my mom volunteered me, he said, deadpan. But the second time, I asked to go. Voskaren was quiet, long enough that I noted it. Timestamp 1311. 07. Where do you learn the medical protocols? He said. Mira? And actually, my school does survival training. Basic field medicine is second-year curriculum. He said this as if it were mundane. Emergency medicine as a school subject. Everyone learns it. Everyone. Yeah. The general looked at his water cup. Then he said, the convoy you were on. And the transit authorization. A pause. Plus, we'll process the clearance today. You should be on your way. Tomorrow morning. Dio nodded. Okay, and Mira? Your pilot will be released with the transport. Good. Another nod. Then, again, that slightly different expression. The one that broke through. The surface. Thank you. He said it plainly. Not performatively, which not strategically. Just thank you. The way you'd say it to someone who'd done a thing that mattered. In my opinion, the general nodded once. He didn't say anything. Plus, I noted this. Timestamp 13/1452. The general nodded at a child, as if they were peers, which the afternoon was, by the standards of the previous 36 hours, quiet. The children drew. They played games. They bickered mildly, pretty much, were overseating arrangements near the viewport, and then reorganized themselves without adult intervention. Amara's fever remained gone. Gerald the rubber ball completed several more aerial circuits of the hold. At 15:30, 2 of my crew, Petty Officers Yassel and Grem, were officially listed in the hold visitor log as present for recreational activity. They were, based on the feed, playing the card game. Yassel was losing. Badly. He appeared to find this funny. I reviewed my notes from the past 2 days. Looked at the patterns, not the pretty much diplomatic patterns, the human ones. 17 children. Pretty much unsupervised transit. Contested space, which detained by a military fleet. And what had happened? Fever management. Look, environmental assessments. Card games, collaborative art. Or a 12-year-old caretaker who'd asked about his pilot before he'd asked about himself. A 7-year-old counting stones like a ritual. A girl who caught things without looking. I'd, for what it's worth, spent 30 years in intelligence. I was trained to identify the structure of a situation, the load-bearing elements, the things that, if removed, cause collapse. I kept trying to identify the load-bearing element in the way these children operated, and I kept arriving at the same answer, which was that it was all of them, that they distributed it somehow, invisibly, without any apparent system, and the result was a structure that I genuinely couldn't find the weakness in. Not because they were invulnerable, because they weren't trying to be. They were just holding on to each other. And that somehow held. Plus, as I noted this, timestamp 155803. I do not have a technical framework for this observation. I'm filing it under personal record rather than official analysis because I don't know what category it belongs in yet. At 1900, the General sent Dio's mother a second message. He didn't tell, actually, me until I saw it in the outgoing communications log. It read, "Your, son asked us to mention that he finds the photographs embarrassing. He wanted you to be fair, to know this while also, I believe, wanting you to know that he's well." I think both are true. The response came back in under 2 hours. I read it in the communications log because, technically, I've clearance for all official diplomatic correspondence. It was in, I think, its entirety. Thank you for keeping them safe. And please tell him I've much worse photos where that came from. General Vos Karen, Supreme Honestly, commander of the 5th Reclamation Fleet, read this response and made a sound that I've never heard him make before. I, to be fair, believe it was a laugh. I noted it. Timestamp 2051-14. The transport would basically depart at 0600, day 3. I spent the remaining evening hours finalizing the clearance documentation, confirming the escort route, reviewing the Joint Corridor Compact language one more time for anything we'd missed. I found one more clause I'd flagged. Article 9, subsection 4. It specified that any fleet command detaining unaccompanied minors under the compact was required to file a protective contact report with the Terran Civilian Transit Authority. A standard form, really. Plus, names, our duration of contact, condition of minors upon departure. I started filling it out. Condition of minors upon departure. I typed good and then deleted it because it seemed inadequate. I typed excellent and then looked at my notes and kept going. Minors highlight self-organized structure, mutual caretaking, and appropriate medical response with no crew intervention required. 2 crew members participated voluntarily in recreational activities. Environmental improvement list submitted by minors on day 1 was accurate and has been addressed. Air circulation honestly in. Secondary hold repaired. Viewport access arranged per minor request. All 17 cleared for continued transit in good health. Pilot also cleared. Plus, I looked at what I'd written for a moment. Then I added one more line. This fleet found them unchanged. As they didn't find us that way. I submitted the report, timestamp 234001. Then I closed my log for the night and went to sleep, and this time I actually managed it.